Hello and welcome to this episode. We're going to be tactically analysing the game between PSG and Real Madrid Femenino. If you're enjoying the content, please smash the like button. I'm trying to reduce the number of points I discuss during the video, so I provide a tactical summary in the description as well as in the comments. If I've missed something, please feel free to put it in the comment section down below. With that, let's get right into the tactical analysis. I think it would be remiss to mention just how many injuries Real Madrid have. So we're thinking of the likes of Kosovo Alani, Marta Cardona, Aureli Cassi, Babette Peter, Malena Ortiz-Cruz, as well as also having Esther Gonzalez, who's leading the line in this game, just come back from injury. She has hit the ground running, but regardless, I think that's really important to mention here. So starting with PSG, they typically set up in a 2-3-2-3, but that's sometimes moved to a little bit of a 2-3-1-4, depending on just how aggressive Giora was in her positioning. But there was a lot of just swapping of positions in that centre midfield. Part of the reason for that swapping was to just take advantage of the space left behind by Real Madrid defenders when they tracked Paris Saint-Germain's forwards dropping off the line. So we're thinking of the likes of Diani, Katoto or Baltimore just dropping off the line, pulling inside without drawing a Real Madrid player away from the defensive line and creating potential spaces in behind. Now, there's significant emphasis on the Paris Saint-Germain fullback, so we're thinking here Kachawi as well as also Lawrence to provide impetus from deep given the formation that Real Madrid were playing. To help PSG pin back Real Madrid, they used a lot of switches. This also ties out the Real Madrid centre midfield because they were constantly having to cover across. So the forward midfield of Castillo, Tornoza, Oroz and Corredera were constantly coming across, and it just really drained them. Despite the numerous changes made by Paris Saint-Germain, overall I'd say that the style remained the same. So as mentioned, we have here Diani, who's tucked inside. This has drawn the attention of Oroz, who's just there behind her, who has to provide cover if Rodrigo goes out to try and pressure Lawrence in that wide space. Also mentioning here Castillo's position, who's relatively high because she's tried to press the centre-backs for Paris Saint-Germain, who often had a lot of time in these deeper areas to be able to just kind of pass and dictate play. I think this is an especially nice example of the Paris Saint-Germain build-up, just because you actually have here Lawrence inside and then you have Gioro actually outside here, just showing the level of fluidity that the Paris Saint-Germain attack had. Also note just how high Lawrence is for when Paris Saint-Germain lose the ball, they're going to try and counter-press or at least slow down Real Madrid's counter-attack. This being the next phase, Paris Saint-Germain has circulated the ball around the back and they've able to get it back to Kochowi on the far side. You can see, as mentioned in the notes, that Gioro is moving to more of a centre forward position again, and you're having all of the centre midfield of Real Madrid have to track across. Whilst I mentioned earlier that Diani and Baltimore were happy to come inside, they were also on other occasions happy to hold the width. Again, another scenario, the 2-3-2-3 shape. Dudek for Paris Saint-Germain is able to step out and to try and just slow her a little. Esther Gonzalez has to step off her player in Diallo and try and put a little bit of pressure on her. Otherwise, passes into the forward line of Paris Saint-Germain are just simply too easy. Also note Galvez's position here. She was stuck between a rock and a hard place. With Potato dropping off the line, Galvez was constantly being drawn higher up the pitch, which then left gaping space in behind. Part of the problem that Real Madrid faced in this first half was the fact that they just weren't able to press out into these spaces. I'd say a big part of that is just not having any breathing space when they did have the ball, and typically kicking the ball long. So even when midfielders did commit to trying to support counter-attacks, they were then left really tired when they were in the defensive shape. I'm only going to provide one example of Paris Saint-Germain's fullbacks getting involved in the attack, but I am definitely doing them a disservice because they were excellent. They were constantly looking to try and overlap or underlap and get into cutback or crossing positions. They were often looking to try and combine with their forwards as well as the number 8 near side. So in this case, we're thinking of Gioro and Baltimore. The movement of the number 8 as well as the forwards is really important for the run of Kachawi or far side with Lawrence, because they create channels by pulling the Real Madrid centre midfielders and defenders away from certain space so that the fullback can run with intent into that channel. It did appear that the channels became more open for these fullback runs in the second half when Real Madrid's 5-4-1 or 5-2-3 was a little bit more aggressive in how much it tracked forwards or wide centre midfielders or fullback. For example, you can see that here with Abellera's position, who's meant to be a centre midfielder, CDM, and just how far wider this central space has been pulled. This being the next stage in the play, you can see just how much of a channel has been created for Karchawi. As mentioned earlier, despite the change in personnel, Saint-Germain was still kind of playing the same way. So we've got here your right right winger tucked inside, and she's right next to your centre forward in Haitama. As Haitama, the centre forward, drops off, Khalifi is running in behind. That creates a dilemma for Galvez, the central centre back, as to whether to protect the space in behind, which is the more dangerous position to concede, or to track the centre forward who dropped off, which is her typical instruction. Another big part of Paris Saint-Germain's play were their corners. The height and power difference was significant. On every Paris Saint-Germain corner, you were worried that they were going to score another. With all the firepower that Paris Saint-Germain have in the team, they also tried a number of counter-attacks too, especially running into those wide spaces as the wing-backs for Real Madrid had committed to an attack. I think the reason there weren't more counter-attack was because of just how well Paris Saint-Germain managed the game with their counter-press, and also the fact that they just had so much possession. On to Real Madrid's build-up. They typically built up in a 3-1-4-2, 3-1-3-3 or a 3-4-3. The idea seemed to be that Real Madrid wanted to draw the Paris Saint-Germain defenders so that a late run by a Real Madrid player could take advantage of the space exposed in behind. When Paris Saint-Germain weren't forcing long goal kicks by the defenders or the goalkeepers after causing a succession of pass backs, they were typically set up in this 4-1-4-1 shape, with the emphasis being on negating any possession by Real Madrid's centre midfielders in that central space. So they made it especially difficult for Dornoza or Oroz to be able to control anything in there. Although I would say that when Abellera came on later on in the game, she actually did relatively well in that space. Of course, Paris Saint-Germain had made a number of substitutions to try and reduce the efficacy of the Paris Saint-Germain 4-1-4-1 shape. Real Madrid would push one of those centre midfielders, so Oroz or Dornoza, higher, so that there would be an extra player in attack if Real Madrid were able to bypass the press. So here in the 28th minute, Real Madrid is set up in their 3-1-4-3. Both of Real Madrid's centre midfielders have pushed over towards the left-hand side, drawing away the centre midfielders of Paris Saint-Germain. This creates the channel for Real Madrid to be able to try and pass through the lines into Corredera. Corredera, throughout her time on the pitch, was tasked with trying to link the defence and attack by dropping deeper after shaking off her marker. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to shake off her marker, and even when she did, Real Madrid were rarely able to then progress the ball particularly higher up the pitch with any sort of accuracy. Okay, so I really enjoy this next phase of play. I like it because it's really elaborate, but I also dislike it because it's really elaborate, because I think then it makes it very difficult to replicate. So again, we have the centre midfield pair of Oroz and Dornoza for Real Madrid really far apart and just in different lines. We have Corredera dropping from her forward position to try and link play. Instead of Kachawi tracking Corredera, she's actually going to go and press towards the wing back of Real Madrid, whilst Diallo is tracking Corredera instead. Diallo did this for much of the defence, so when they pushed up and were more aggressive, he would try and cover for them a little bit deeper, so whether that was Dudek or Kachawi, she was constantly there plugging the holes behind their press. As I said, I really like this play just because of how elaborate it is and the fact that they're able to take advantage of the space where Paris Saint-Germain would want Guillaume to be. Obviously, Guillaume is more interested in tracking the movement of Oroz higher up the pitch. Ultimately, Real Madrid aren't able to escape, partially due to the quick reactions of Dudek, but also because of just how difficult this play actually was. Okay, so with that, on to Paris Saint-Germain's 4-1-2-3 or 4-1-4-1 press. I don't really think there's much of a difference there beyond maybe more aggressive or slightly more reserved positioning of the forward. Guren, Debretz, the number 8 for Paris Saint-Germain, were typically trying to mark that central space, but it was a little bit of a balancing act because they were also trying to mark Dornoza and Oroz. So as demonstrated in those previous examples, they could be drawn away from that central space, which would then create channels for Real Madrid. Whenever Paris Saint-Germain was set up in such a way that they'd covered short passes, they would try and force Real Madrid into passing backwards, and from there it would snowball effect where Real Madrid would pass back again and again and again, and eventually it would go back to the goalkeeper, they would be pressed and they'd kick it long, and Paris Saint-Germain would get the ball back. Okay, so on to Real Madrid's counter-attack. So in the first half, I think that Paris Saint-Germain's counter-pressing prevented most of Real Madrid's counter-attacks even before they started. So whether that was with actually getting contact on the ball or obstructing the path of a Real Madrid player, this caused most Real Madrid counter-attacks to just fizzle out. Also due to the workload of the Real Madrid players defensively, I think they lacked energy and the coordination when they did get the possession back to actually counter. You can't criticise them too much for choosing the safe option on occasion and actually retaining the ball, but given the difference in quality between the two teams, they were probably best suited to trying to attack when Paris Saint-Germain weren't defensively set up. In the second half, I do think the Real Madrid counter-attacks were a little bit better. This was partially forced by the change in shape that Real Madrid had when out of possession. So instead of mostly being in their 5-4-1 shape, they moved to a little bit more of a 5-2-3 and were more aggressive in how they tracked the movement of the forwards, as well as also the number 8s for Paris Saint-Germain. Of course, they were also probably helped by the slight drop-off in quality due to the number of substitutions that Paris Saint-Germain made, as well as also the fresh legs of Real Madrid's substitutes. Most of the game, I'd say that Real Madrid didn't really press. However, where Paris Saint-Germain or Real Madrid have throw-ins deep in Paris Saint-Germain's defensive third, then Real Madrid were very happy to press and just generally compress space. So you can see in this example in the 62nd minute where the Real Madrid players, as the play breaks down, and due to the fact that they have numbers up the pitch, what with the wing backs and centre midfielders already being there, they try and just at least slow Paris Saint-Germain down and eventually actually force a turnover. If you've enjoyed the video, please give it a like. In the next video, we'll be tactically analysing the game in the Women's Champions League again between Bayern and Lyon. That one should be amazing. With that,